So I'll tell you the story of our next speaker, who is Eirini Argyri, and comes from the same place as me. So back in my first ICPR conference, I met Eirini because a guy said, "Oh, you're from Greece. Let me introduce you to Eirini. She's also from Greece." And I wasn't into psychedelic studies back then, but Eirini came to me and asked me, "Did you actually have a psychedelic experience that you would say was transformative for your life?" And I said, "This is why we're here, no? Okay, so this is exactly what I'm studying in my PhD, and I'm writing these kind of stories and analyze them. Would you like to talk about it?" And this is how we met. So, Eirini Argyri.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Very good to be here and connect again, Isis. I'm Eirini Argyri. I am from Greece as well. I am based at the University of Exeter in England. And over the past few years, I have been researching how psychedelic experiences challenge the taken for granted, our sense of self, the ways we relate to others, or even to the nature of reality itself. So this talk is about what happens when our perception of normal, our stereotype of reality, breaks apart. How do we navigate this? So we have seen the waves of research and the popular narratives focusing on the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics. And more recently, again, the pendulum is shifting back to the question, are psychedelics actually harmful? So what I'm arguing here is that psychedelics are neither therapeutic nor harmful, not inherently so. What they are is catalysts, in the first instance, of pluripotency, the opening of many possible directions, and in this case I'll be focusing on meaning of how we make sense from that. So pluripotent, put simply, means not fixed in terms of developmental avenues, and in the psychedelic context, it's a recognition that the outcome is not predetermined. I find helpful here this conceptualization of pivotal mental states proposed by Ari Brouwer and Robin Carhart Harris, saying that psychedelics induce these transient, intense, hyperplastic mind and brain states that can be triggered by acute stress, and they propose that these states mediate psychological transformation, but may also lead to traumatic experiences. And it's useful to see here that this hyperplasticity, of course, relates to this windows of increased malleability. So this quotation by Humphrey Osmond, who coined the term psychedelic we saw earlier as well, shows an early appreciation of this malleability and its transformative potential for our worldview. The world is what we make of it. Once our mold for world making is formed, it most strongly resists change. Psychedelics allow us for a little while to divest ourselves from these acquired assumptions and see the universe again with an innocent eye. So we know these predictive coding theories about how our brain works relate to this, talk about it as we function as this hierarchical inference machine, working on these prior assumptions based on our experience, using top-down priors to interpret bottom-up sensory inputs. So psychedelics are thought to disrupt this process, reducing the influence of high-level priors. And this shift fosters an openness to possibilities, unbound by habitual expectations, and lays the groundwork for intuitive reasoning, an embodied, rapid mode of understanding that synthesizes complex information in novel ways. And then there's this philosopher, developmental psychologist, Alison Gopnik, that suggests that this liberated state of cognition parallels the exploratory learning that we see in children. This is a high-temperature searching for making sense of our environment or our experience, meaning that we don't just search for the nearby and most likely, but a wider space of possibility that we prioritize over probability. So it's an exploration of the new over the exploitation of the known. So psychedelics can temporarily recreate this cognitive flexibility, facilitating intuitive insights that feel revelatory and transformative. And so that's not always an easy process. I'll very briefly touch on my work with the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences project. You can also check out all our studies on the website there. So we have published some papers from studies looking at people that experience difficulties that last longer than a day after the effects of the substances have worn off. We looked at the kinds of difficulties that people experience. We looked at the kinds of things that they find helpful in navigating these difficulties. We also recently published on how specific coping strategies may relate to specific difficulties and the kinds of duration and severity of these difficulties. The longest duration we saw was with existential struggle. And we did also do this interview study I led on navigating groundlessness, so looking at this existential struggle that may persist. And so, we looked at how people experienced ontological shock and existential distress following their trip. So, what is ontological shock? It's a term proposed by theologian Paul Tillich that describes this profound disorientation that occurs when individuals confront the threat of non-being. According to R.D. Lang, experiences that create profound cognitive dissonance between prior perceptions of reality and those arising following an anomalous experience that appears genuine can threaten ontological security, the sense of stability in one's understanding of reality that creates a feeling of trust in the world. And so we asked our participants through these interviews about the kinds of difficulties they experienced, firstly, and we saw that they emerged with a greater sense of existential confusion. What is real? How do I make sense of this? And some common threads of their difficulties, we saw firstly this sustained destabilization of their sense of reality. So this quote from one of our participants: "The psychedelic experience was so powerful that it fundamentally challenged my perception of reality and how well I could trust my perceptions in the day-to-day. I could never really trust my sense of what's actually going on." And then we also saw this overwhelming and sometimes obsessive preoccupation with making sense of the experience. I wanted to understand existence somehow, and I knew I couldn't. In this DMT high, you feel like you can understand more things. And then you come back and you're like, what the heck? This wanting to understand the meaning of it all, or the universe, or existence, and then just not being able to take no for an answer. So a brief recap, we see that this destabilization that psychedelics can bring about can open doors to reconfiguration, but this does come with risks, including confusion, fear, disorientation, and also suggestibility that relates to this malleability, which is a big discussion we're not going to have the time to get into here, but one worth having. And so on the other side of things, we did this survey study looking at people that had transformative experiences, the majority of them here very positive experiences, positive transformations. They experienced a lot of awe during their trip, and this also related to this more increased overlap between their perception of self and other humans, non-human beings, and the world itself. And so we asked them about the kinds of changes they saw in their understanding of themselves, other people, and reality. And that was some qualitative data that we then used this method called thematic network analysis to look at how these themes related to each other. And this led us to identify these three clusters of epistemic shifts. So epistemic meaning how you stand towards knowledge. And we saw here, firstly, this dissolution of societal and natural boundaries, this expanded awareness and openness to complexity. And then also prosociality we saw through this increased compassion, acceptance of difference, open-mindedness. So we suggest that these findings suggest that psychedelic-induced awe may facilitate cognitive accommodation towards a more holistic worldview. And so just going to touch on a couple of quotations to see a bit more depth of this. My love for the planet and nature has increased. I have better and more genuine relationships with people and aim to be my best self. It also made me better at comprehending complex ideas. I think it genuinely made me develop a more nuanced understanding of how abstract ideas like economics and people work, as I was thinking more deeply about them in a less biased way. And I have come into a place of realizing an interconnectedness of everything, including human beings. This has created more of an us attitude as opposed to us and them, and has made me understand people's pain as a source of what I might perceive as difficult behavior. So compassion has become an integrated part of how I perceive my world. And so in this study, we suggest, based on participants' reports, that the psychedelic experiences appear to not only dissolve boundaries of self and other, but also reveal the social constructivist nature of reality, exposing individuals to the subjectivity and malleability of the narratives that shape their worldviews. This disruption of taken for granted assumptions can foster a reflective stance towards societal norms and collective belief systems, encouraging a more open and critical perspective. And then also collaborated on this other study looking at how psychedelics changed people's sexuality, gender, and relationship dynamics, where we also saw people describing this reduction, concern about social perceptions, rejecting gender binary normative identities, aligning with the concept of queerness, this umbrella term encompassing identities related to sexuality and gender that challenge traditional cultural norms. But then again, it's important to note here that this process of change, where questioning your previous normality, is not always easy. In this groundlessness interview study I mentioned earlier, we did see that some people really struggled with questioning their gender and sexual orientation, and they were left in persisting and distressing confusion regarding their identity. So I'm suggesting here that psychedelics are catalysts of diversifying experiences, which are highly unusual and unexpected events or situations that push individuals outside the realm of normality and require them to adopt new ways of thinking and new perspectives. Diversifying experiences, such as sudden illness or other types of unexpected difficulties, are demanding, in that they require individuals to cognitively adapt or accommodate to their new circumstances. In this process, individuals are forced to reconsider the strategies, values, and perspectives that they have held so far, embrace new ones that are more fitting in their current context. So this is from a paper coming from socio-cognitive literature outside of psychedelics, actually looking at the link between multiculturalism and creativity. And they suggest this model where we see that when adaptive resources are high, moderate diversifying experiences are appraised primarily as a challenge, increasing creativity in this case, whereas when adaptive resources are low, moderate diversifying experiences are appraised primarily as a threat, leading, in this case, to creative decrements. I'm suggesting here that we can see the outcome as consciousness expansion when the adaptive resources are at play. And I'm often reminded of this quotation by Joseph Campbell, that the psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight. So what helps us learn to swim, to avoid drowning? What makes a good toolkit of resources, if you like? So speaking from insights from this groundlessness study, perhaps unsurprisingly, grounding was a big one. Almost all participants mentioned they were helped by grounding, in the sense of embodiment first. This participant described that they felt as if I was kind of outside my body. So I did things like the stretching, yoga, and then trauma release exercises. There's trauma in my body and I've got to get rid of it. I've got to shake. I've got to get this stuff out of my body. And then things like walking barefoot. Luckily, this person knew about grounding. And then, of course, the cognitive and social normalization of experience. Just having someone say that is just like a normal thing that happens, I remember it being really reassuring and just knowing that it was okay, that someone else had been there and had some nice advice. So these experiences of ontological shock that psychedelics trigger can be understood as moments of liminality, a state in which established beliefs and identities dissolve, opening individuals to new ways of seeing, this ecstasis, to stand outside of yourself, of your previous way of looking at the world. But reflection, sense-making, and supportive scaffolding, just like in any transformative learning process, where we encounter a disorientation that calls us to reorient, are essential for individuals to find stability and re-establish ontological security. So viewing integration as a form of transformative learning underscores the importance of accessible frameworks and community-based support systems to facilitate this process. So I've spoken about this as a visualization of this model applied to psychedelics. And then it's worth asking ourselves, what are these adaptive resources that we need at both an individual and collective level? So that can be meditative and embodiment practices, social support and communities of practice, empowering bidirectional mentorship structures that can counteract this vulnerability to authority. And we also need this increased awareness of psychodiversity beyond neurodiversity and the neuroessentialist paradigm of the different ways that our psyche changes from these experiences. We need to hold ontological pluralism in order to be able to counteract this increasing polarization we're facing globally. And then, last but not least, of course, they can help facilitate this ecological awareness, so we need to think at the bigger picture, what do we need to do to help people when they feel this interconnected web, our collective bigger picture, to facilitate towards increased care for that and working together. And just finally, I just want to help my adaptive resources, our community of practice in Exeter, Psycho UK, welfare, harm reduction charity, and our transdisciplinary psychedelic colloquium in Exeter, and everyone here, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me.
Yep, good. Thank you so much for the amazing talk, and I think it's really fundamental for the field, this part of study, because I think we're often in this bubble because we are onto the psychedelic field that we kind of forget that most of the people out there don't know about psychedelics, but also they're afraid. And they're afraid because there's this part of the experiences that we somehow, being in the field for so many years, have forgotten about. So thank you so much, and we have time for questions. Two questions?
Hello, I'm an outsider here. I'm not in the field that is being studied here. That's why a little while ago my question was a little bit odd to Isis because it didn't fit. But mainly, as this being the first psychedelic intervention for me, for what I know from the psychedelic world, which is nothing because I don't have any experience till now. I'm looking for the first experience with the psychedelic. And no stories, please. No stories, please. Oh, okay. So I am 57 years old. Is it safe for me to get a DMT trip?
No one can really answer that except for yourself with some deep reflection. Life experience does seem to be a protective factor, but that is when people have really worked through previous traumas, they feel really well resourced. I don't think it would be safe for anyone else to tell you that it's safe to take DMT. So it really needs to come from your own agency.
Thank you, that was really interesting. I was just wondering if you were familiar with Aidan Lyon's book, The Psychedelic Experience Revealing the Mind, where he talks about the notion of psychedelic philosophy, where psychedelics could be used by philosophers as ways of investigating consciousness, and they still use analytic methods to explore their insights, let's say. And so this question of like threatened ontological stability and ontological shock, potentially this is because the ontological assumptions that people have actually weren't founded. And so it goes back to like the original notion of like Socratic wisdom in philosophy. Wisdom is knowing that you don't know. And it's interesting that like some of the quotes you put up is even after the ontological shock, people are then striving to, yeah, but I want to know what it means, and almost like missing that maybe the message is you can't know or can't have that stability in the way we expect. Could you maybe comment on that?
Yeah, it was actually one of the things that helped participants in this study of ontological shock was coming to this acceptance of letting go of the need for big answers. And so I'm not familiar with the book that you mentioned, but we do a lot of philosophy of mind and psychedelics research at Exeter. Peter Sosted-Hughes, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He has proposed this metaphysics matrix to help psychedelic-assisted therapists for people to have some guidance towards finding their ways to new beliefs afterwards. There is debate in the field about whether that is an appropriate approach. I think regardless, it's very important that the answers come from within and the person finds their own way of interpreting reality. And if we can facilitate an increased tolerance for uncertainty through that, that is the goal, to be able to hold the ambiguity, to hold multiple potential answers, to hold multiple perspectives.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eirini, for your talk. And moving on to